Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in. I had a little bit of a different idea for a video today. I've been thinking about doing this for a while and just now getting around to it. But today I wanted to just talk about 10 bluegrass albums I think you ought to hear. And this ain't even a top 10 of mine or intended to be a comprehensive list of best bluegrass albums or anything like that. I just try to think almost like knee-jerk reaction style about 10 bluegrass albums that mean a lot to me. And I talk to my students all the time and fellow musicians and everything about how important listening is to the life of a musician, and especially in the learning process. And when I think about growing up and learning to play, listening a lot of times was my favorite part of that, and sometimes it still is, almost to a fault. Sometimes I have to tell myself to actually get to it and start playing and practicing, because I could sit around and listen all day. I'm kind of a fan first. But in that spirit, I wanted to just throw 10 albums at you that I like, and maybe this will turn into a series or something. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump into my list here, and I hope y'all get something out of this and enjoy following up on the listening recommendations. So there's going to be some Tony Rice on the list if I'm involved with it, and today I decided to go with Manzanita. This album came out in '79, pretty early on in Tony's solo career. And it's got Ricky Skaggs, Jerry Douglas, David Grisman, Daryl Anger, and Todd Phillips on it. And I gotta say, I'm real lucky to get to play with Todd in the Appalachian Roadshow now. I've learned a lot from him, and he's a real good friend too. But this album, I could talk about these albums nonstop, so I'm gonna kind of try to keep my thoughts concise and mention things that stand out to me, because everything about this album is awesome. But one of the most important things I get from it is how reactive the entire rhythm section is. Tony in particular. But every one of these tracks feels totally alive. They breathe, they move, they jump and push and pull and react. And that's a lot of what I love in music and a lot of what I chase in my own playing, live and in the studio. And it can be particularly hard to get in the studio. So the way this album has that raw, reactive sound to it is incredible. It's got some of my favorite Tony Rice classics on it, some great solos, and it's hard to go wrong with this one. Manzanita, Tony Rice. Check it out. All right, next up is Del and the Boys by the Del McCoury Band. This came out in 2001. You got Del on guitar, Ronnie McCoury on mandolin, Rob McCoury on banjo, Jason Carter on fiddle, and Mike Bubb on bass. This is one of the first bluegrass albums that ever really got my attention when I was very young. I think me and my family might have seen Del live around this time, but I think we got this album even before that. And that opening track, 1952 Vincent Black Lightning, hit me like a truck. First time I heard it, and I got to love every single track on the album. There's no telling how many times I've listened to it. It's one of those things where, when you have an album in a hard copy in your childhood, and it's one of those things that sits around and you sort of automatically re-listen to it, it sort of occupies a different space in your brain than, let's say, something I discovered these days and listen to on Spotify that gets kind of lost in the shuffle. These albums that I got into early on really left a mark in a good way, and this is one of those. Del's rhythm playing is still some of my favorite rhythm guitar ever, and there's plenty of good examples of that on this album. For those of you that want to dig in a little bit, one of the things that I love on this album that kills me every time I hear it is how he chokes that 4 chord on Gone But Not Forgotten. Check that out, and you'll see what I mean. But this is a great album. Another thing about the sound of this album and the sound of the Del McCoury Band in general, these are all some of my favorite musicians on each of their instruments, but the total sound of the band and the selection of the material, it's unique to me in that it's got a traditional foundation, but it's totally original. Nothing sounds recycled. The way that they approach things is just completely unique, and it works on every single track. So, Del and the Boys. All right, next up is My Home Ain't in the Hall of Fame by J.D. Crowe and the New South. This came out in '79. You got Keith Whitley on guitar and vocals, Jimmy Gaudreau on mandolin, Bobby Sloan on fiddle, Steve Bryan on electric bass, and of course J.D. Crowe's playing banjo. I'm a huge J.D. Crowe fan. I love his entire body of work, and he's one of the best banjo players ever, just an absolute gold standard. But I also really value his creative vision and his choice of material. And that's one of the main things I love about this album is how Crowe blended country and bluegrass and how he let his current lineup shine. This album doesn't have a bad song on it, and I find myself re-listening a lot. There's been many a long drive where I've had this album on and digging in and paying attention to every detail. So this is a classic, and it's a Hall of Fame album. Check it out. Okay, next up is Brand New Strings by Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder. This is another album that I discovered early on in my bluegrass music journey as a kid, and this came out in 2004. One thing I like about this one, I could have picked a bunch of Skaggs albums to put in this spot, but I think this one doesn't get talked about enough. And so like Live at the Charleston Music Hall was another one that was really important to me. I listened to that a ton. But I wanted to put a studio album in this spot because I love Skaggs' creativity in the studio. It's unique from anything else I've heard in the bluegrass world. Part of that's material and song selection, and then I also love Skaggs' recording techniques and ideas and stuff. He will layer a ton of guitars. There will be like a Dan Electro electric baritone guitar or a high-strung guitar or gut string or whatever the song needs, and it creates these totally unique textures, and those sounds really kind of soaked into my brain when I was younger. Jeff Taylor's accordion shows up in awesome places that you wouldn't really expect. And then there's a, You'll Get Blindsided by Johnny Highland Telecaster solo on the title track there. That fired me up when I was a kid. I could have run through a brick wall the first time I heard that. Cody Kilby and Johnny Highland going back and forth. Lordy. Check this one out. It's pretty special. All right, Talking to Myself by the Lonesome River Band. I knew I wanted to put a Lonesome River Band album on this list because they're one of my top favorite bluegrass groups. And, of course, everybody loves that Ronnie Bowman, Dan Tyminski lineup, and all the lineups have been great. I'm not going to pick favorites, but when I really got to thinking about it, I realized that I had re-listened to this one the most, I think. This will be the Don Rigsby, Kenny Smith, Ronnie Bowman, Sammy Sheeler lineup. So Kenny on guitar, Ronnie Bowman on bass, Don Rigsby on mandolin, Sammy Sheeler on banjo. And it's just a solid bluegrass record. There's a lot of really satisfying, straight-ahead bluegrass stuff on here. Kenny's a guitar hero, so it's great to hear him doing his thing on this album. Then there are some tracks that stand out as a little bit different, like The Crime I Didn't Do. That's a killer song. I love the story of that one and the way they arranged it and the instrumentation. And it's a little bit different than a straight-ahead bluegrass song. So this is a great Lonesome River Band album, great bluegrass album, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot. All right, this is going to mix things up a little bit. Aereo-Plain by John Hartford. This album came out in '71. You got John Hartford on banjo, guitar, and fiddle, Norman Blake on guitar and mandolin, Vassar Clements on fiddle, Tut Taylor on dobro, and Randy Scruggs on electric bass. This album is wild. It's grounded in acoustic music and bluegrass sounds, but it's also got some rock and folk stuff in it, some crazy lyrics, some off-the-wall stuff, some concept songs that I won't even spoil if you hadn't heard them. You're just going to have to experience this album because it is an experience. And to me, it sounds like creative freedom. That's the personality of this album, is total spontaneous creative freedom. And I love this album just for what it is on its own. Norman Blake being a guitar hero, I think of him as sort of a traditional fiddle tune, really grounded type of player in general. So it's really cool to hear him playing on something so weird and totally owning it and totally belonging and contributing and adapting to everything. Also, Tut Taylor was a friend of mine. I got to know him when I was a teenager playing at the Cook Shack in Iredell County, North Carolina. And so it's great to hear Tut, his personality on there, because his personality comes through in his playing quite a bit. But I love this album for what it is on its own, and I also love the fact that it was a catalyst for newgrass music, because I'm a big fan of the newgrass revival and that whole entire movement that followed it. And I'm sure John didn't intend to start a subgenre. He was just creating, but I like what happened because of it. So check this one out to get your mind opened a little bit. All right, now we got Carolina Blue by Lou Reed, Terry Balcom, and Carolina. This one came out in '93. You got Terry Balcom on banjo, Lou Reed on mandolin, Clay Jones on guitar, and Marcus Smith on bass. This type of bluegrass sound is kind of part of my DNA. A lot of times the way I put it is I often play like this in jam sessions. Like if I'm playing some standard bluegrass with people that would have heard this album and been influenced by it, we kind of fall into this vocabulary and this attitude pretty often if we're jamming at a fiddler's convention or IBMA or something like that. It's a lot of fun. It's straightforward, hard driving, tough, mean sounding bluegrass, and that's fun and satisfying to listen to. All these guys are superstars. Terry Balcom is one of my favorite banjo players ever. Clay Jones is a beast, and the way he plays rhythm has influenced me in some important ways. So this is a great, fun, straight-ahead driving bluegrass album. If that's what you're looking for, check this out. Now, staying with the 90s bluegrass for a minute, we've got Every Time You Say Goodbye by Alison, Krauss, and Union Station. This came out in '92, and the lineup is Tim Stafford on guitar, Adam Steffi on mandolin, Ron Block on banjo, Barry Bales on bass, and of course Alison Krauss on fiddle. This was another album that I had a hard copy of when I was a kid, so it was in the rotation a lot. Those sounds are deep in my brain, and also every one of those musicians is a hero of mine on their respective instruments. And Tim Stafford and Adam Steffi are especially important to me because guitar and mandolin are my main instruments. And some of the vocabulary that I have for approaching bluegrass music comes from those guys and comes from hearing this album as much as I did. The material's awesome. It's very unique in its own way. It's extremely tasteful and restrained. You can tell how careful they were and how they put this sound together. And each one of these players is sort of a precision player with a distinct style. So this is a great album. It's my favorite Alison Krauss album, and I think y'all are going to dig it too. Now, I've got to have a Larry Sparks album on this list, and I'm going to go with Silver Reflections. Now, it's hard to choose, but this one has, I think, the largest number of my Sparks favorites on one album. So the tracks, it's kind of the greatest hits on one album in a way. The lineup at this time, this came out in '87. The lineup was Barry Crabtree on banjo, D. Sparks on bass, Tim Sargent on dobro. The fiddle duties on this album were split up. You got Art Stamper, David Harvey, and Glenn Duncan. And the mandolin was divided between David Harvey and Randy Jones. But Larry Sparks has been one of my favorites for a long time, but especially here recently, I've kind of been digging back into his material, and it's helped me sort of take a different angle to bluegrass guitar when I've needed something to change it up from my first instinct. Injecting some Sparks into my licks and my rhythm styles and all that kind of thing has helped me a lot lately. It's been enriching experience going through his discography and digging in, and I'd suggest it to any guitar player, any bluegrass fan. Obviously, he's one of the most soulful vocalists to ever be a part of this genre, and one of the most creative guitar players. So you can't go wrong with any Larry Sparks album. Check them all out, but this one is a good place to start if you need suggestions. I want to be sure to have some first-generation bluegrass stuff on this list, so I decided to go with the Essential Bill Monroe, 1945 to 49. This is a great one to start with because it contains the Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs era of the Bluegrass Boys, and that's some of the most fundamental bluegrass stuff that exists. And it's amazing listening to it because it holds up so well. It holds up perfectly. It's so energized. It's so on fire. And you can learn a lot from digging back into this stuff. I've always loved Bill Monroe's sound. My dad was a big fan, is a big fan. When I was growing up, we had the Country Music Hall of Fame collection, which that's kind of a bonus one on the list here. So I heard that from before when I played music. I was singing along with that because it was just on in the house. So I've always loved the high Lonesome vocals. I love his mandolin style. I like the groove of it. I like the long melody that he has in mind that falls underneath the right hand frequency. It's special stuff, and it will really electrify you if you listen to it the right way. So I recommend it highly, and I hope y'all enjoyed as much as I have. So that's my 10 bluegrass albums that you need to hear. These are all just my opinions. Like I say, it's not comprehensive. It's not really ranked or in any particular order. These are just albums that have influenced me and done me a lot of good as a musician. And there's a lot more where this come from. So if you like this video, let me know. You can put in requests for other listening recommendations that you want me to put out there, or suggestions about similar videos I should do in the future. But I enjoyed doing this today. Hope y'all enjoyed watching, and I definitely hope you enjoy listening. Be sure to check out some of the other stuff on the channel here, and I will see y'all on the road sometime.